Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about shoes and the 5 main things that modern footwear does to our feet that aren't the best. So we're going to talk about heel height, we're going to talk about sole flexibility, we're going to talk about toe box width or narrowness, as the case might be. We're going to talk about something called toe spring, which is how the toe gets lifted up in a lot of shoes. And we're going to talk about how the shoe attaches to your feet, because that's actually something you want as a nicely attached shoe, so it's not always flopping around. So let's break that down one by one. Modern footwear is definitely one of the big reasons that modern feet are in such bad shape. And I'd like to go over the 5 big things that damage our feet in normal footwear and what to start thinking about in terms of finding footwear that is healthier for our feet. So I'm sure everyone has heard that high heels aren't that great for you, so that's what we're going to start with. It's pretty obvious that a human foot doesn't have a 2.5-inch heel attached to the bottom of our leg, and when we put a heel like that on our shoes, it really messes up our entire body. So the big impact on our feet when you have a heel shoe is that it starts to overly lengthen the bottom part of the foot and overly shorten the top part of the foot. So it's a big contributor to plantar fasciitis and all those sort of related disorders of an imbalance between the top and bottom of the foot. At a whole body level, the amount of lift caused by a heel means that your entire body has to correct for what that lift is doing at the bottom of your leg. So let me just illustrate that for you. I have this book, which is actually quite a lot smaller than this heel. It's maybe kind of more the heel you would get on a fairly reasonable hiking style boot. So, that's almost an inch of heel on a boot people are wearing to walk in. And what this size of heel does to this piece of pipe, if you stick it under its heel, you can see the angle of that pipe is crazy. So that much heel under a human foot is adding that exact kind of angling to the foot, and then your body has to compensate for that, and it does it by bending in all kinds of ways. So it's awesome because you're able to still walk around, but all those bends lead to mechanical compensations that really impact our ability to walk well and move well in general. So heels are a big issue in modern footwear. And I'd like to call your attention to the fact, again, this shoe isn't a heel. This is a hiking shoe boot, and it still has a stack of almost an inch. So you're going to find a heel in shoes that you don't expect to find a heel in. Here's even an example. This is a shoe I like a lot more. It is a minimus, fairly minimal running shoe from New Balance, I think. But you can see there's still some heel stack going on there. So this is something I would call a transitional shoe, but also a reminder that even in a shoe that can be better for your foot, you have to really be on your guard for a raised heel. So they appear in all kinds of places. Men's dress shoes absolutely all have heels, and even most women's flats have some amount of raised heel. So you have to be on your guard with heel height. Make sure your heel, that your shoe that you're buying either clearly says that there is 0 drop, or if you're transitioning, if you're somebody who has been wearing an inch plus heel for many years, your tissues probably won't love having a 0 drop shoe. So you're going to want to think about having a 5mm heel, and that's where something like this shoe is going to become a little bit more relevant, because that's a step down point. Okay, so heels, not awesome. Another thing that's not awesome is the pointy toe, because in a natural foot, in an ideal foot, human toes are wider than the ball of the foot. And if you look at a baby's feet, you're going to see that the toes widen out past the part of the foot that we see as widest in adult feet, which is kind of that metatarsal head line at the toe knuckles. So what happens when we squash all the toes in with our footwear is that the toes become permanently squished together. It takes away a lot of the space in between the toe bones. The space between the toe bones is where our nerves and muscles run. So when there's no space there, you start having impacts on the foot like neuromas, which are irritated nerves because they don't have enough space to work. They're getting squashed. You can also start to lose muscle leverage because most or many of the foot muscles attach onto the toes. When those toes aren't in the right position, those muscles can't do their job properly. The place you're going to probably see this the most is the big toe, because what happens when the big toe gets squashed in is that the muscle that pulls it out gets really weak. Now this muscle, the abductor hallucis longus, I believe, when that gets weak, you also start to collapse through your arch, because that's one of the arch creation muscles, and you start becoming buniony because now your toe is moving in and your toe knuckle is moving out and everything gets messed up. So narrow toe boxes in so many of our shoes. And just for fun, look at the difference between my foot and this toe box. It's crazy. I've got a whole toe sticking out on either side. So the amount of squishing we're doing with our toe boxes is not cool. And I will warn you, once you start transitioning to a wider toe box that's better for your toes, it's almost impossible to put your feet into narrow shoes again because it's so uncomfortable. Your toes are, once they're freed, they want to stay free. Even a really sensible boot like a Blundstone, really comfortable, really great, look at that heel, look at that toe. So definitely not appropriate for a more natural foot. Another thing to think about is what the sole of your shoe is like, how flexible it is. Because when you walk, your foot should become an active part of your gait. It isn't just a lump of meat at the end of your leg. It should be pushing as part of your walking cycle. So if you don't have any flexibility in your sole, you lose the ability for your foot to participate in your walk. The other thing you lose out from with a stiff sole like this is mobility, because your feet are adapted to walk on varied natural surfaces, and a varied natural surface offers all kinds of lumps and bumps which naturally move the bones of your foot around. When the bones of your foot are moved around relative to one another, they become and stay mobile, which allows them to be shock absorbers as you walk. When they're stuck in a boot with zero amount of flexibility in the sole, you never get that textural input and your feet tend to stiffen. So having a more flexible sole is part of the answer to mobilizing your feet, particularly if you end up taking that flexibly soled foot onto natural surfaces, which I definitely recommend as you move forward. Just to show you the difference between this Blundstone style sole, or this one has a little bit of bend but right through the metatarsal heads and nothing through the toes. The toes are actually where we want to have some bend. This is a pair of unshoes, so very minimal, and you can basically just curl that up in a ball. So much more freedom for the foot to do what it's really supposed to do in this particular shoe. Okay, another thing that goes kind of with the heel height in shaping our feet is something called toe spring. And toe spring is where the front of the foot, the toes, are artificially lifted up by the shoe. So if I put the shoe on the ground, I can stick kind of, my thumb and my whole hand underneath the toe of this boot. So what's happening to your foot here is it's kind of being curved like a rocker. The toes are lifted and the heel is lifted. Again, that makes the bottom of the foot very long. It lengthens out the plantar fascia and the bottom of the foot muscles, and it shortens on a semi-permanent basis all of the tissues in the top of the foot. So hammer toes, definitely related to this, plantar fasciitis, all kinds of issues related to this imbalance between the top and the bottom of the foot. So toe spring is something that you don't want to have. And here again, my unshoe is a really good example because it's totally flat. There's zero spring there. This Lems boot, this is a nice transitional brand or a heavier minimal shoe type of boot, does have a little visual toe spring, but because the shoe's so flexible, it's not as bad as it would be otherwise. So it's one thing I wish Lems would change, but if there is some flexibility in the sole, then it's not going to be as troubling. thing to think about is how well your shoe is attached to your foot. So these are my Bedrock hiking sandals. These are a transitional sandal. They're not super minimal, although they do have lots of flex. They have about a 10mm base. And you can see, as well as the toe strap, they've got this heel strap. And that means that when I walk, this shoe is never going to come off my foot. And the reason that's important is because if you're walking in something like a flip-flop or a slide, your toes will naturally grip in order to make sure that shoe stays on your foot. That particular gripping action will move the bones of your foot around in a way that contributes to a really poor gait. So not only do you get some nasty tension building up in the foot that you really don't want to have, but your whole walking cycle is compromised. The other thing I have in this shoe is my metatarsal pad. So that's one of the tools that we use to help rebalance the bottom of the foot with the top of the foot. And I'll talk about that in a different video, in the metatarsal pad video, in fact. But I just thought I'd mention that so you knew what it was. Another example of a nicely attached sandal is the Earth Runner. So this is a really great, popular, minimal footwear brand, a little bit more minimal than the Bedrock. Lots of flexibility, lots of connection, no heel, no toe spring, and it's basically just a really nice sandal. So just to recap then, 5 things to think about in your footwear. Is there a raised heel? Is there a raised toe? Is the sole flexible? Is it fully attached to your foot? And there's one more. What's the last one? Is the toe box narrower than your toes are supposed to be? So wide toe box is absolutely key. So there you go. 5 things to think about in your footwear. As you start to transition to more minimal footwear, it's a good idea to go slowly. So you're not going to go from narrow-toed cowboy boot with a heel into flippy little unshoe, because that's going to be a huge change for your body, even though it may not feel like a huge change from the outside. That's one reason that when people started getting into barefoot running a few years ago, there were so many injuries because people didn't take the time to adjust. So this entire course is a tool for you to make a healthy and safe transition, but you want to support yourself in your transition by choosing the right shoes. And I'm going to talk about all of that in the footwear transition video, so you'll have lots of information and tools to plan a safe transition. Just wanted to make sure you really understood what you're transitioning away from and why. Okay? Catch you in the next video.